So in one of my previous videos, somebody asked me a really good question about getting arrested. And they asked, can you get arrested for possession if the police don't find you in possession of, let's say, illegal drugs? Can you get arrested for possession? Now, typically when a person asks me this question, I usually see this in two common scenarios. In the first situation, or in the first scenario, let's say you get pulled over by the police and you have some illegal drugs in your pocket. And of course you don't want the police to find them on you. And so what you do is you take the drugs out of your pocket and you quickly hide it, maybe in the center console or in the glove compartment, so that the police don't locate it, at least physically, on your person. Now, in the second scenario, what I see is, let's say you're walking on the street and the police stop you and they say, hey, I want to ask you a couple of questions, but before I do so, I would like to pat you down for officer safety. Now, in this second scenario, let's say you still have illegal drugs in your pocket. Obviously, once the police officer pats you down, they're going to know that you have something illegal in your pocket. And so in the second scenario, what I typically see is that people run, and they run as fast as they can, and they're hoping to maybe get around a corner or a bend of a street where they can quickly take the item out of their pocket and toss it somewhere so that the police don't find that item on them. And so in both of these situations, in both of these scenarios, can you get arrested for possession if the police don't find anything illegal on you? Now, I think the best way for me to break this down is to outline a couple of rules. So let's start with rule number one. Rule number one is the police are not stupid. They are not blind. Let's take scenario one, for example. If the police are stopped behind you and they see you through your rear window taking items and like scuffling in your center console, they're obviously going to know that you're hiding something. So if you're going to hide something, try not to make it obvious, because I have 20/20 vision. If I can see it in body camera footage, I'm pretty sure that the police officer who is sitting there right behind you in their car can see what you're doing. Similarly, if you throw something, just because you don't have the item on you doesn't mean that you can't get charged, right? So rule number one is the police are not blind, the police are not stupid. If they see you do something, they can still charge you with possession. Rule number two is there's this concept called constructive possession. And the idea of constructive possession, it simply means that just because you are not actually physically possessing something does not mean that you don't have the ability to possess it. And I kind of hate this concept because it's so difficult to explain in criminal law terms, but constructive possession typically requires that you have knowledge of the item and that you have the access and the ability to control that item. Now, these two elements, they're different in every state and jurisdiction, but the idea of constructive possession is pretty much common everywhere. So a very common and obvious example of constructive possession is, let's say you have a center console and the center console is open and you have an illegal substance in that center console. But let's say you're the driver of that car. There's nobody else in the car. You own the car. You operate the car frequently, and there's an illegal bag of drugs in the car. While that bag is not physically on you, a prosecutor would try to argue constructive possession, that you knew, you had knowledge of the bag, and that you had the ability to access and control it, meaning that it was just within arm's reach. That is what the concept of constructive possession is. And so typically, if an officer either sees you try to hide an item or they see you throw an item, they're usually going to write that in their report that although the item was not recovered on you, you were in constructive possession of the item. So that is constructive possession. That's rule number two. Now, rule number three is really important. And this is my rule. Just because you are charged with a crime, it does not mean that you will be convicted of that crime. I'm going to repeat that. Just because somebody charges you with possession, it doesn't mean that they actually have the ability to prove you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Going to trial is a really high standard. To prove somebody guilty of a crime is a really high standard. So while the police may be able to write it in their report that you were in possession of the item because they saw you throw it or they saw you hide it, going to a jury or going to a judge with that same evidence is completely different. So don't give up, but don't lose all hope just because you were charged with a crime, right? And so the answer to this overall question is sure. You can be charged with possessing an item even though you were not in actual possession of the item. But the real question is, will you be convicted of possessing that item? These are two different things. The good thing about our court process is that there are extremely high standards that are required before you're convicted of a crime. And so it's really important to talk to your attorney about what happened and what your options are so that you know how best to argue your case if it comes down to you going forward to trial. So while you may be in constructive possession of an item, a jury may feel differently. That is the benefit of our criminal justice system, is that we have neutral parties who decide what your guilt or innocence is. So again, don't lose all hope if you're charged with a crime of possession. And if it's a situation where you were searched illegally, there are so many options that are available where your attorney can potentially suppress the evidence or ask the judge to throw out the evidence if it was illegally obtained. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment them below, and I'm always happy to answer them in a new video just like this. And if you found this information helpful, I would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Take care, and I'll see you soon.